Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning, Senator Cornyn.
You know, most of us have multiple notebooks and notes and books and things like that in front of us. Can you hold up what you've been referring to in answering our questions? Is there anything on it?
That letterhead that says United States Senate.
That's impressive.
Is that true no matter what the issue is, whether it's gun, abortion, health care, campaign finance? Does that process hold true for everything?
Yes, judges can't just wake up one day and say, I have an agenda, I like guns, I hate guns, I like abortion, I hate abortion, and walk in like a royal queen and impose, their will on the world. You have to wait for cases and controversies, which is the language of the Constitution, to wind their way through the process.
All right. Well, Senator Sass gave us a good civics lesson. I hope that's the basic lesson in law here.
So on something that is really a major cause with major effect on over half of the population of this country, who are women, after all, it's distressing not to get a straight answer. So let me try again. Do you agree with Justice Scalia's view that Roe was wrongly decided?
Senator, I completely understand why you are asking the question, but again, I can't pre-commit or say, yes, I'm going in with some agenda, because I'm not. I don't have any agenda. I have no agenda to try to overrule Casey. I have an agenda to stick to the rule of law and decide cases as they come.
People say that you're a female Scalia. What would you say?
I would say that Justice Scalia was obviously a mentor. And as I said when I accepted the president's nomination, that his philosophy is mine too. He was a very eloquent defender of originalism, and that was also true of textualism, which is the way that I approach statutes and their interpretation. And similarly to what I just said about originalism, for textualism, the judge approaches the text as it was written with the meaning it had at the time and doesn't infuse her own meaning into it. But I want to be careful to say that if I'm confirmed, you would not be getting Justice Scalia, you would be getting Justice Barrett. And that's so because originalists don't always agree, and neither do textualists. Justices Scalia and Thomas disagreed often enough that my friend Judge Amul Thapar teaches a class called Scalia versus Thomas. It's not a mechanical exercise.
Well, I'll wait till the movie comes out.
Have you seen the George Floyd video?
I have.
What impact did it have on you?
Senator, as you might imagine, given that I have 2 Black children, that was very, very personal for my family. Jesse was with the boys on a camping trip out in South Dakota, so I was there, and my 17-year-old daughter, Vivian, who's adopted from Haiti, all of this was erupting. It was very difficult for her. We wept together in my room, and then it was also difficult for my daughter, Juliet, who's 10. I had to try to explain some of this to them. I mean, my children, to this point in their lives, have had the benefit of growing up in a cocoon where they have not yet experienced hatred or violence. And for Vivian, to understand that there would be a risk to her brother or the son she might have one day of that kind of brutality has been an ongoing conversation. It's a difficult one for us, like it is for Americans all over the country.
And so I'd like to ask you, as an originalist who obviously has a passion for history, I can't imagine that you could separate the two, to reflect on the history of this country. Where are we today when it comes to the issue of race? Some argue it's fine. Everything's fine, and you don't have to even teach children about the history of slavery or discrimination. Others say there's implicit bias in so many aspects of American life that we have to be very candid about and address. Others go further and say, no, it's systemic racism that's built into America, and we have to be much more pointed in our addressing it. How do you feel?
So I think it is an entirely uncontroversial and obvious statement given, as we just talked about, the George Floyd video, that racism persists in our country. As to putting my finger on the nature of the problem, whether, as you say, it's just outright or systemic racism, or how to tackle the issue of making it better, those things, are policy questions. They're hotly contested policy questions that have been in the news and discussed all summer. So while, as I did share my personal experience, I'm very, happy to discuss the reaction our family had to the George Floyd video, giving broader statements or making, broader diagnoses about the problem of racism is kind of beyond what I'm capable of doing as a judge.
Well, I would doubt that. I just don't believe you can be as passionate about originalism and the history behind language that we've had for decades, if not centuries, without having some thought about where we stand today. But I'm not going to press you on that.
No matter what anyone else may think or expect, I have not committed to anyone or so much as signaled. I've never even written. I've been in a couple of opinions in the Seventh Circuit that have been around the edges of election law. But I haven't even written anything that I would think anybody could reasonably say, oh, this is how she might resolve an election dispute. And I would consider it, I certainly hope that all members of the committee have more confidence in my integrity than to think that I would allow myself to be used as a pawn to decide this election for the American people. So that would be on the question of actual bias. And you asked about the appearance of bias.
Correct.
And you're right that the statute does require a justice or judge to recuse when there's an appearance of bias. And what I will commit to every member of this committee, to the rest of the Senate, and to the American people is that I will consider all factors that are relevant to that question, that requires recusal when there's an appearance of bias. And there is case law under the statute. And as I referenced earlier, in describing the recusal process at the Supreme Court, Justice Ginsburg said that it is always done with consultation of the other justices. And so I promise you that if I were confirmed and if an election dispute arises, both of which are ifs, that I would very seriously undertake that process and I would consider every relevant factor. I can't commit to you right now for the reasons that we've talked about before, but I do assure you of my integrity, and I do assure you that I would take that question very seriously.
Don't pack the court. In recent days, I've seen some in the media and some in this body try to redefine what it means to pack the court. Some have suggested, well, court packing takes various forms, and it can mean confirming a lot of people all at once. Some have defined it so as to suggest that it consists of doing that which the Trump administration and the Republican Senate have been doing over the last 3.5 years, which is filling vacancies as they have arisen and doing so with textualist, originalist judges. This may not be something that some like, but this is not court packing. Court packing is itself manipulative. It's something that has great danger to do immense political and constitutional harm to our system of government, in part because it would set up a one-way ratchet. Once you create a position and confirm someone to that position, absent death, retirement, or impeachment and removal, that position remains in place. So if, for example, a future Congress and White House were to decide to get together and to pack the court, and increase the number, say, to 11. And let's say it's Democrats who do that. And we've got Joe Biden now as a presidential candidate who's refusing to say whether he would do it. There's a reason he's not saying whether he would do it. There's only one reason why you refuse to answer that question, and it's if you're wanting to be able to do it. But you don't want to take the heat for the fact that you're thinking about doing it right now. So if they do that, where does it lead? Well, it inevitably leads to the point where the next time Republicans have control of both houses of Congress and the White House, they'd increase it as well. You'd end up increasing it incrementally. Before long, it looks like the Senate in Star Wars, where you've got hundreds of people on there. I don't know what the total number would be, but you increase it at all, you change the number at all, you do so for partisan political purposes at all, you delegitimize the court.
I want to run through a few examples. So Brown v. Board of Education, as we know, that holds that the 14th Amendment prohibits states from segregating schools on the basis of race. So is that precedent?
Yes.
That can't be overruled?
Well, that is precedent. And as I think I said in that same article, it's super precedent. People consider it to be on that very small list of things that are so widely established and agreed upon by everyone. Calls for its overruling simply don't exist.
Okay. Well, you also separately acknowledged that in Planned Parenthood v. Casey, the Supreme Court's controlling opinion talked about the reliance interest on Roe v. Wade, which it treated in that case as super precedent. Is Roe a super precedent?
How would you define super precedent?
I might have thought someday I'd be sitting in that chair. I'm not. I'm up here, so I'm asking you.
Okay, well, people use super precedent differently.
Okay.
The way that it's used in the scholarship and the way that I was using it in the article that you're reading from was to define cases that are so well settled that no political actors and no people seriously push for their overruling. And I'm answering a lot of questions about Roe, which I think indicates that Roe doesn't fall in that category. And scholars across the spectrum say that doesn't mean that Roe should be overruled, but descriptively it does mean that it's not a case that everyone has accepted and doesn't call for its overruling.
Okay, so here's what's interesting to me. You said that Brown is, and I know my time is running out, is a super precedent. That's something the Supreme Court has not even said, but you have said that. So if you say that, why won't you say that about Roe v. Wade, a case that the court's controlling opinion in that Planned Parenthood v. Casey case has described as a super precedent? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Well, Senator, I can just give you the same answer that I just did. I'm using a term in that article that is from the scholarly literature. It's actually one that was developed by scholars who are, certainly not conservative scholars, who take a more progressive approach to the Constitution. And again, as Richard Fallon from Harvard said, Roe is not a super precedent because calls for its overruling have never ceased, but that doesn't mean that Roe should be overruled. It just means that it doesn't fall on the small handful of cases like Marbury versus Madison and Brown versus the board that no one questions anymore.
Is United States v. Virginia military, is that super precedent?
Senator Klobuchar, if you continue to ask questions about super precedents that aren't on the list of the super precedents that I discussed in the article that are well acknowledged in the constitutional law literature, every time you ask the question, I will have to say that I can't grade it.
Okay. Well, I am then left with looking at the tracks of your record and where it leads the American people. And I think it leads us to a place that's going to have severe repercussions for them. Thank you.
A few years later, while running for president, then candidate Trump said on Twitter, and I believe my colleague put this up earlier, if I win the presidency, my judicial appointments will do the right thing, unlike Bush's appointee, John Roberts, on Obamacare. And as recently as just 2 months ago, Vice President Pence described Chief Justice Roberts as, and I'm quoting, a disappointment to conservatives because of the Obamacare decision. In upholding the ACA, the Chief Justice was the one justice appointed by a Republican president who went against the political wishes of the party that appointed him. Why did you choose to single him out for criticism in that constitutional commentary article?
Well, Senator Coons, I was writing about the majority opinion, and Chief Justice Roberts was the author of the opinion. So I was simply discussing what the 5-justice majority adopted as its reasoning. And I'd like to emphasize again that I was not attacking Chief Justice Roberts or impugning his character or anything of that sort. It was an academic critique. And I want to emphasize, just given this line of questions that you're asking, that, I am standing before the committee today saying that I have the integrity to act consistently with my oath and apply the law as the law, to approach the ACA and every other statute without bias, and I have not made any commitments or deals or anything like that. I'm not here on a mission to destroy the Affordable Care Act. I'm just here to apply the law and adhere to the rule of law.